So Preakestine is a pathway that leads to Preakestolen or Pulpit Rock. I'm standing on Pulpit Rock here, but I kind of like the little rocky outcrops that you see as you get to the top of Preakestolen. I've painted Pulpit Rock several times, so I didn't quite want to go to doing it again. I made a sketch, which I was quite happy with in oil pastel, and now I'm doing the same thing with oil pastel onto the primed surface, or the sort of green surface, which I think I did in oil paint originally rather than acrylic. I'm trying to get a reasonable interpretation of the sketch. I'm not really putting myself under the pressure in getting it exactly accurate. And I'm just sketching out my rocks, and I think it's nice even at this point to show contrast in horizontal and vertical lines, making different shapes. And it's going to be the theme of this series of 12 paintings is very much about having a very calm sky, almost featureless, but with a richness of colour, often gradiated, and have that contrasted with a very textural painting, not only in the paint surface but in the outline or of the shape of the rocks. I'm looking at the sky colour, and I'm using cold wax medium, mixing white, and some, I think it's called Video Blue, made by Vasari. Pure laziness, I could have mixed this up. And it's going on with a long flat palette knife. Feels lovely putting it on, although to get that crisp edge around the skyline is proving a little bit difficult. I'm persevering there, but I think it's time to cheat just a little bit. So what I do is I get a nice round hogshead brush, and I'm sorry to the purists out there that might not agree that this is a good move, but it works. So I've dipped it in a little bit of Gamsol. That's allowing me to get this crisp edge. If it's all totally crisp, it's a bit, should I say, boring. So there are areas of imperfection which I could correct, but looking at it I think they're nice, and I leave it. Back with the palette knife, just building up this overcast colour, and without adding any more colour to that, I'm just taking the texture down and spreading the paint around with my little Japanese roller, which is so much fun. It takes the texture down, it moves the paint around the surface, and I've added some more of the same mixture. This is with a palette knife with a little touch of Payne's grey in it, just for the very, very top of the sky, and it's going on in fairly thick lumps. It's got cold wax medium in, like the rest of the sky has too. I'm getting reasonable coverage there, and I'm back with the same roller, and all I do is roll it across the top section of the sky so it merges. You can see it's got some imperfections, not a 100% hugely crisp line. Now I showed bits of this earlier, forgive my editing, but this is that oil bar actually going on now, and it's quite a saturated yellow ochre colour. Feels really buttery and creamy as it goes on. If you have some of these, especially if they've been lying around a little bit, you have to kind of shave off the sticky skin or film that forms on them. So I use the scalpel blade just to remove that and almost sharpen it really. It might not stay like that, and I have doubts at its brightness at this stage, but it helps me map out the painting. Now it's time to put in the darkest darks on this piece. I'm using cold wax medium there with a little bit of Prussian blue and Payne's grey. not covering the whole background, just areas that are in shadow. And I'm taking it into the middle ground and nice big satisfying blobs of it in the foreground. Really highly textured here. And getting a variety of horizontal and vertical strokes with it. Now I made up a sort of a warm grey here and just put it on with a palette knife. I've left little parts of the underpainting to come through, little dark areas. And this is the skewer. And I've been asked to show this in more of a close-up because my elbow blocks it in other videos, which is a good point, really. And the way these marks are made, it's just a bamboo skewer. You can use the pointed edge of a paintbrush. I'm using a nice big flat palette knife here to create other marks. And I'm going back with the oil bar, just really dropping, there's hardly any pressure going on, just to show some vegetation and connection to the vegetation over the rocks. I'm back with my skewer, just doing some little final scrapes away. And I'm using the back end of the skewer where it's bigger and flatter to show wider marks at this point. I could have used a palette knife. I've taken my darks down a tone here and using a nice big flat palette knife to show broad areas of it. Really thick paint. Cold wax medium is got that stiffness in it that makes your paint stand up, and it shows marks really well without self-leveling. It's a really versatile thing to use as well. And just getting the right hand side skyline done with this dark. And I'm bringing that nice sort of middle dark, slightly darker than middle dark, but I'm bringing it down into the mid-ground area and the foreground, just to sort of balance the painting as I come into the foreground. Now I've mixed up pretty much the same ingredients in terms of paint hue or pigment, but lighter, and I'm just showing areas of the rock where the surface is catching light, and this stops it looking flat. Well, I hope it does anyway. Using very much the same technique and the same knife. It's highly textured. There's quite a lot of Prussian blue in that, and that's a sort of mid value. Immense fun to scrape that on with a palette knife. And I'm getting nice broader, flatter surfaces of the rock here in the foreground. Extremely therapeutic to put this on, trial this on. And I'm scraping away down to the dark underpainting with the side of the palette knife. What you don't see me doing in the video so much, just because I've edited a lot of it out, is I'm mixing an awful lot of, spending a lot of time on the palette mixing my paints, and an awful lot of time looking at the reference sketch or photos, whichever I'm using, so I don't get too run off on a tangent and get carried away. It's very easy to get carried away, especially things like using the skewer. You know, I need to be really aware that I need to put the brakes on it sometimes. I've got a slightly warmer colour for the rocks. It helps me connect to the path because it is the same material, you know, the rocky outcrop and the path. And you can see the variety of greys that I've made here with Payne's grey, blue, Coldwax medium, white, and a little bit of warmth coming in there from burnt umber or raw umber, I think that is. And just to show shadowed areas in the vegetation, I'm using a very dark mix, and it's not so blue at this point, it's got some warmth in it. I'm looking at the saturation of that yellow ochre as well, and I think I need to calm it down, so I've got some more of this raw umber going in, and I'm just patting it into the yellow ochre here. I like little bits of this yellow ochre to shine through, but it is too bright, so this paint's working, I think, nicely anyway. Just varying out the warm brownish colour, taking it into the path again. It helps me connect the path so it just doesn't look like a corner on its own. You know, it needs to connect with the rest of the painting. Here we go, skewer time, and I'm mixing up some vertical and horizontal marks with the skewer. You don't see me do it an awful lot either in the video, but you'll collect a big blob of paint with the skewer, so it's important to just have a tissue or something in one hand and keep taking that blob off. Nice mixture of vertical and horizontal lines with the skewer. Getting a bit carried away here. It's quite a forgiving medium. If you do overdo it, sometimes I just put a finger on it and pat it down some of the edges, the lines that I make, or you can use a palette knife or even a brush if you do overdo it. And if the worst comes to the worst, you can scrape it away, you can start again. Sometimes in that scraping away process you find you improve it and it doesn't actually need more marks or more paint. Or at least that's what I find anyway. Who said there's a right way or a wrong way to do this? You know, you just kind of invent your own procedure. I've mixed up a little bit of a highlight colour just to bring some brightness into the foreground and to show some depth of the foliage. I have to think of a better word than foliage. I think I use it quite a lot. And I've darkened that mix up a little bit just to give variety. Again, some depth, and I'm using a nice chiseled edged brush here. I kind of like the flat lines that gives, and it's quite effective on rock surfaces too. Now I've mixed the highlight colour, and to some extent it works. And this probably should have been a time when I either have a dance with my Labradoodle or go for a cup of tea, because as much as I think it's effective in certain ways, I just think that it's too bright, and I think there's too much of it when I eventually finish adding it. And I'm not editing it out of the video, because I think it's important to see that we do things that we're not happy with in a painting. You know, not everything succeeds. And at this point, you know, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, no. But still I keep going, and I think something's going to turn it around, and it doesn't actually happen that way. Because it is appealing to me. I'm seeing the value of this bright colour, especially when I go on to darks. It pops a little bit more. But I'm not sure it's there in the background. getting going. Yeah, I should have had a cup of tea here. Again, it's down to taste. I just think some of those horizontal lines are too much. So I'm distracting myself by going into the foreground with some foliage. Sorry. It's really big, heavy blobs of paint. I'm only just touching the surface and hoping it comes off, because if I press in, I get mud. Now, I've come to my senses a little bit here, and I'm not taking it all away, because there are little freckles of it that just kind of help me out and give me some shape to the painting, but the majority of it had to go. Now, as I just scrape the paint down here, I'm thinking, whoa, happy accident. It sort of works okay. Just needed to be calmed down that little bit, and possibly I've got away with it. I don't know what you think. I'm looking at it, I'm quite happy. I've mixed up a nice foliage green here. Sorry for saying foliage again. I'm not using a huge amount of it, just little suggestions that there is some green hanging on in there, in this quite rugged, rocky outcrop. Adding more texture. What I really love about Norwegian landscape is the way that it's not going to let you have your own way with it. You know, it's got that kind of ruggedness. There's no way it's going to let you build a shopping mall on it. You know, it's kind of, it's not field after field with hedges around it, very, very safe, and you know, man has totally beaten it. I think the Norwegian landscape and, you know, natural features, they're competition for man, without getting too philosophical. But that's why I like it, really. That's why I just like the shape and the texture of it, and the colours. Last little touches here with a palette knife and some really thick paint, making some curious random lines. And there you go. So this is Preikestolen, one of the rocky outcrops on the way up to the very famous Preikestolen, or Pulpit Rock. And I hope you like it. If you're in a generous mood, you can put a like down. Not that I'm making a huge impact on YouTube, but it's just nice to get a like. Thank you.